moving. One of our ID mile teachers, she's moving, and then we just we
that you want to protect yourself, but protect yourself at places if they can get more, they get them, but not at the places where you can't get them, where
yeah.
you're struggling to get anybody. Now, Jackie, this week you were talking about hiring. Now, the thing I want to remind before we get to Dr. Sain, our expert tonight, is going to talk about human resources. Welcome, everybody. There's 10 things. I've counted them up. Good thing it was only 10. I'd had to take my shoes off. There's 10 things that you have to do to hire a new person. That is, we talk about due process. That is the substance, the substantive due process. There's 10 things you got to do. Now, the procedural, here's where the rub comes in and why it's different from for every school and every school district and every hiring entity. Who does those 10 things is what varies. You can't vary that you do those 10 things.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
You do not have, you don't get to say, well, we're going to do this and not going to do that. Background checks, drug tests, transcripts, license, you know, 3 references. There's 10 things altogether. Everybody that gets hired has to go through all 10. That's the way that works. The difference is, I'll use me for an example. When I was, okay, Andrew Lisi, I hope you get feeling better. When I was in Burke County, for example, that's one of the far western counties in North Carolina. We didn't have a pot to pee in or a window to throw it out of. We had 2 people in our HR department. I'm serious. We had 2. And one did hiring and the other did benefits. That was it. And so you had to do everything to hire a new teacher. I matriculated up the line and eventually got to Charlotte. I didn't have to do anything. When they came to me, they were already vetted, background checked, and all that. Now, one of the problems now is because of the expense of background checks and drug tests, sometimes you'll get people that come to your building for you to interview, even in the wealthy districts, that have not had those 2 things done. They're going to do them if you recommend them. But used to, they did them all. Everybody that came were already ready to go. Now, so you've got to understand, you got to know what due process is in your district. What we're not talking about the substantive. That's the same for everybody. You've got to know the procedural. Do I do background checks? Do I do reference checks? Do I do those things? That's why you got to go talk to your principal. How do we do it here? Because the next district over won't do it the same way that you do it here. It's to get you to understand that you got to do your part. Now, schools that don't vet their candidates and make principals do that, oh my God, is it time consuming? Calling references, trying to get scheduling, oh, it's awful. It's just awful. But you got to do it. As soon as you don't, it'll jump back and bite you if you don't do it. So that's the thing. That's what you were supposed to learn this week from that is we got to know what the substance of the due process of hiring is and then, but more importantly, for our district, we've got to know what the actual procedure is specific to our district, because it varies from district to district, even in the same counties in the same states. I'm telling you, it's kind of crazy. Now, and please remember, and I'm sure that Dr. Sain is going to cover this later, you can't offer a job as a principal. The school board hires people at the recommendation of the superintendent. And part of the problem that goes on there is back to that money thing about not doing background checks and drugs. Generally, those are the 2 things that will knock people out of that we're going to get offered a job is the background check turns up something or the drug test turns up something. So don't say we're going to hire you or we want to offer you this job. You recommend to the HR and the superintendent, and he recommends to the board, and the board makes the decision. I am amazed how many people can't pass a background check or a drug test in the school business. I'm amazed. I hope that we don't lessen those standards for our kids' sake. Now, the other thing is employee assistance. You should know enough to be able to answer general questions, but like Jackie pointed out, um, you don't, you know, you need to know the person. You can't, you can't get into salaries, and you shouldn't as a principal. And that shouldn't be part of your hiring decisions or letting go is how much people cost. You need to know the people in central office refer them to. So make sure that you understand that you got to have some general knowledge, but the most important thing is knowing who to refer them to for what. Now, I want to talk 1 minute about the bad side of employee assistance. Now, I'm going to sound like a heartless and cruel person and a really bad person. Uh, Guilty. Have made it. It's no secret. I'm still Saul on the road to Damascus. I'm not Paul yet. I'm trying to do better, but I'm not there yet. But I'm going to tell you the downside of EAP. If you have somebody who has some issues and they go to EAP, you're not able to dismiss them for those issues, and that can get you over a barrel as a principal. For example, I had a teacher who was a drug addict, but she got to employee assistance, and I had to use a day-to-day substitute for 8 months. Couldn't even hire a long-term sub because she was still her job. And you talking about being over a barrel in a school that needed teachers and then have one and have to get a sub day to day. And they wouldn't let me employ a long-term sub or do any of that because that was against it, because it was still her job. That was miserable. But you need to know the rules in your district on EAP and what assistance program you have. If they go to them, is their job protected? It's a good thing that we assist our employees, but as a principal, I can tell you it can kick you in the seat of the pants. But you need to know those things, so you need to find out what employee assistance you got. Now, Jackie brought up something in one of her posts as well about end of year contract teachers. Now, we all know that you've got to have just cause, even in right to work states, North and South Carolina, to get rid of somebody. But if you have somebody on the end of your contract, you don't. So state law in both states is if you're employed after the first 10 days of school, you are not on a continuing contract. You are on an end of year contract with no expectation of continued employment. You have no property right to a job because we are right to work states. And that's the irony, right to work. But you have no right to work after that contract. That's in North and South Carolina, by the way, which are right to work states. If you are hired after the first 10 days of school, you have no property right. You don't have to tell people if they're not any good. You just let them go. You just you don't offer them another contract. You don't have to do the action plan or any of that stuff. You don't have to have anything other than see you later. That's for end of year contract, and anybody hired after the first 10 days is on an end of year contract. Now, some people will try to negotiate that with districts that come in because they know there are shortages. Most districts will not budge on that deal. But that is the rule. Now, quickly, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go right to Dr. Sain as soon as I do this. I've got this document, MTSS for teachers. You've probably seen it before. Last semester in 601. Let me get the right one here. Here it is. But what I want to point out is if you are in the personnel, you got to make sure, again, the procedural part of due process. If you plan to put a teacher on action plan, you need to have them on there by second semester. And you need to have shown that you did something in the first semester to try to improve their teaching. So by the beginning of the second quarter right here in October, you had to start trying to get them some assistance, a mentor or some one-on-one, so that by the end of the second quarter, the beginning of the third, you can put them on an action plan so that at the end of the third, you can non-renew them. I'm sure Dr. Sain, he's a nicer person than I am, so I won't make him do the bad part. But again, that's all part of that procedural due process. You've got to hit your marks on those dates. If you've got teachers on a continuing contract, you've got to hit those marks. In the first quarter, you got to start giving them some support. In the second quarter, action plan so that you can let them go at the end of the third quarter. All right. If you don't hit those dates, you got to start all over the next year, by the way. Can't start them all, you can't start them next year on an action plan. Doesn't work that way. All right, so we're at week 11. Dr. Sain's going to do HR tonight. Next week, we'll do facilities. Then you'll have an Easter break, case study 4. Then Dr. Sain's going to do financial management, mostly school budgeting, and then I'll finish up our last time. All right. Again, I'm pleased with your work. Make sure that you keep, your pacing guide is on that weekly schedule. Make sure you remember that skip task 1 has 2 prompts. And we're rolling. Dr. Sain, thank you for being here tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Sorry I missed last week. I could not.
Tell us about your trip.
So I spent the week in Washington, Oregon, and California doing some MTSS, and I was a bit surprised. They're a lot farther behind in terms of MTSS implementation than we are here in the great state of North Carolina, and I'm sure South Carolina. But yeah, they're just beginning that whole process. So I was out there helping them out. So it was good. It was much colder there than it was here. So you all were lucky.
Yeah, we had a good week.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna dive right in, and I, again, kind of stealing from my resource bank. I just took a couple of presentations and merged them from what I used to do in Lincoln County with supporting principals, especially our newer principals and our assistant principals, with an overview of human resources. But Dr. Lamb's already hit the nail on the head with the number one thing that you can do is know your HR policies and know your HR director. Find somebody in that department that becomes your best friend so that they can be your sounding board. Yeah. I never made an HR related decision without having a sounding board from someone in that department. And so if you do that, 9 times out of 10, you can't go wrong. The problem you might run into is in some of the smaller districts, like Dr. Lamb said, you might not have too many people that you can go to. However, I would still try to find somebody, even if it's from a neighboring district, one of us, somebody that you can rely on. And then know your district's procedures and protocols. And I say that probably in every presentation that I'm going to do with you, because again, every district's a little bit different. So what I'm going to tell you is based off of my past experiences. I know Dr. Lamb was going to talk about his experiences, but again, it comes down to what is your district's procedures and protocols. So let's dive right in. And kind of how I present this is that there's 4 key elements to HR management. And they may be called something different from district to district, but generally it's recruitment, which looks a little bit different in our post-COVID reality or post-COVID schools, hiring, development and support, and then that 4th one, which everyone dreads, is evaluation. So we're just going to dive right into those. And you all, I'm not the best at monitoring the chat, as you probably know, so please just unmute and blurt out your question if you have some specifics throughout this presentation. All right, so let's start with recruitment. And one of the things that I always share with leaders, and one of the things that I actually was not good at in my job as a principal when I was, those years of being a principal, is that I wasn't always in recruiter mode, because I was a principal at 2 schools which had pretty much a 0 turnover rate. And again, I lived in a world that was before COVID. I don't know if you all know this, but I took my central office job on January 1st of 2020. So I won the lottery, a lot of people say, because I didn't have to lead in throughout that chaos that everybody did. But so I was not the best recruiter. But boy, the principal who took my spot at my last school, that's what she is. She's a recruiter, because the turnover rate is about 70% now. So again, things have changed. So always be in a recruiter mode. And what that means, quickly, make your schools as visible as possible in your community. We live in a world of competition. Public schools are in competition with charters, private, home schools. It's a new reality for public education that we have to be in such competition. So again, you got to make your school as visible as possible. You got to use social media to highlight your events and your successes. You got to bring in constantly your community, local organization, volunteers. And people ask me a lot of times, what does it matter if you have people in your buildings from the community or local organizations? Well, the big thing is that those people go out and talk. They talk about what's going on in your school. And also they're extra set of hands for your buildings, especially when you're trying to find people to cover classes or to actually make the school run. But again, You want people to be positively talking about your community. You can't do that alone, so bring people in who are going to go back out and share that information. Take every advantage to make yourself visible. Be it, if you're, for example, if you're an elementary assistant principal, go to the middle school and high school athletic events, go to awards nights, but be visible in the community, volunteer, because when people see you, they're gonna positively associate your name with the school. This one is one that it's so easy. Make your school store public, and if you don't have a school store, if you don't have any type of branding, do it. I was at a school, the last school that I was principal of, our colors were burgundy and sage green. It looked like, inside it looked like a funeral home. I got our sit team together and I said, listen, we've got to do something. We've got to change it. We changed them to purple and teal, kind of like the Charlotte Hornets. You will not believe the impact that made, just changing 2 colors. And again, as principal, if your district office gives you that authority to do it, it makes a difference. It makes your parents happy. Again, we made some really fancy t-shirts. People started wearing them, but again, make it as open as possible. Attend as many job fairs as possible. Even if you don't have vacancies, attend them, keep a list, and then familiarize yourself with colleges and universities in your area, or even if they're not in your area, so you can establish strong relationships to get some of their student teachers. And in today's world, that is so important. When I was in Kannapolis, we had a strong relationship with UNC Charlotte. UNC Charlotte, they signed an agreement with our school district, and specifically my school, that we would get at least 10 student teachers a year. That made a huge impact on our school. Now, when I was there, we didn't have any jobs to give them, but we were able to give them to some neighboring schools. Now, last year, for example, at that school, they had 10 student teachers. They hired 9 of them. So again, if you've got a university or college that you're affiliated with, make those connections.
Quick question, Dr. Sain. So when you said you guys changed the colors, do you have to get input from anybody else? Like if you have ideas for that?
Yeah, so I had to submit a proposal to our school board.
Oh, okay.
And I'm sure every district is different. I know some districts are very particular about paint. Again, it just depends on the district. But yes, for me, I had to submit that proposal. So when we're looking for candidates, who are our ideal candidates? And remember, when you're going into this new world as an administrator, you can't just be looking for a good teacher, right? Who are your ideal candidates? Your ideal candidates are your student teachers from your own school or within your district. And here's what I looked for when I was looking for a new teacher just out of college. I looked for their experience to be with neighboring districts that might share our same demographics. They might have similar curriculum adoptions. They might have similar pacing or scope and sequences. And the reason I did that is because, we want our teachers to be successful, and our new teachers specifically. And we don't always have the time to support them like we can. So again, we tried to hire people that had similar student teaching experiences if they weren't from our district. You want candidates with experience. But I'll tell you, I probably was 50-50 with when I hired teachers with experience. 50% of the time it was very successful. 50% of the time it was not successful. So again, a lot of people always say, just go with the one with experience. That's not always the case. Candidates, here's the one that I was in a pretty tough district, pretty urban district. Behavior was an issue. So this was my top thing. Pick a candidate who values student relationship. And our superintendent always said this, and I always thought about this in interviews. Curriculum can be learned, but you can't teach somebody how to bond with kids. We've got instructional coaches, we've got lead teachers. If you can't get a person in there who doesn't want to work with kids, you're never going to be successful. So I always put that at the top of my list. Another one, which was going to come in handy today, and the reality that we are, is that candidates with multiple licensure areas. So getting those math and science teachers at the middle school, maybe dually licensed, EC, EL, the multiple things you've got listed on your teacher license, the better. Because in today's reality, what are teachers having to do during their planning? What are we having to do when we can't find subs? Cover. And we're having to get creative with scheduling. So the more line items that your teachers have on their licensure, the better it is to run a school successfully in today's reality. And the last one, and this one is something that I always talked about flexibility when I was hiring, but in today's world, that means something entirely different. You got to hire people who are willing to be flexible. They're willing to cover classes. They're willing to go above and beyond for the greater school in today's world. And you all live this, but it's so much more than your own classroom. Every teacher is now making sure that the building is running. And there are some districts throughout the state who that's nothing new, but I would say that probably 90% of our districts across the state in this post-COVID world are dealing with shortages, not finding subs, not finding teachers, and we're having to, the role of teacher is changing drastically. So just look for those things when you're recruiting candidates. This one, I added this slide in after 2020. Always anticipate vacancies. And so when I'm working with some of my colleagues at the state, they're like, "Oh, Josh, we always had that slot." And so I was pretty fortunate, like I said, with vacancies. But now, especially in Lincoln County, which was a pretty safe district, we always got our teachers back. It's a struggle, and that's what I did a lot in my district work, is went out and tried to recruit people to come to our district, even though that wasn't on my list of duties. Here's some of the things that I've seen success with, and the principals that I've worked with in this post-COVID world. Develop rapport with certified subs. Make them a part of your school community. So they're not substitutes, they're teachers in your buildings. Give them PD. Celebrate with them. Invite them to every luncheon you have. Invite them to after-school events. Give them every t-shirt you have in your school store. Make them a part of your school. There was a couple of very successful principals in our district who just stopped calling them substitutes. They were teachers. Kids referred them as teachers. They gave them a space because that's what it's going to take. I've got a couple of high schools in Lincoln County that have recreated their teacher cadet programs, and those are working really well. We've got several teachers who are student teachers who were in that teacher cadet program, and they're coming back because they were in that teacher cadet program. They were at that school. So that can develop some rapport, especially if you're in the elementary or middle school setting. Make sure you work with your high schools there. Network with your local colleges and universities, specifically on Fridays. A lot of college kids don't have classes on Fridays. So if they're of the right age and they want to be a teacher, get them approved to be a substitute. Know your parents, especially at the elementary level. Many of your stay-at-home moms and dads are former teachers. And so if you find out that they're a teacher, keep them involved so that when something does arise, a lot of them say, "Oh, I'm good at staying at home." But if they've got kids in that building and they start seeing there's holes and you've already developed the rapport, you might be able to get them in to help you out with some subbing or possibly long-term class fillings or placements. And then, just a big one for elementary school is pregnancies, right? And they're always going to happen. So you gotta plan for parental leave. And I found in my experience that those former stay-at-home moms were great candidates for that parental leave, or when you had a teacher out to stay at home with their kids. So just keep that in mind. That really impacts the elementary world the most, but that does not mean that it doesn't happen in middle and high school.
Dr. Sain,
yes.
We have 9 teachers who before the end will be out.
And that's what happens, Kristen. It's like I had that similar situation. I only had 5, and that was absolute hell. So I can imagine 9.
Yeah, and our 10th one is adopting.
Yeah.
So any day.
Yeah, it's crazy, but so anticipate that, because that happens as well. Because guess what? In elementary school especially, everybody's buddies, right? Everybody's doing things together on the weekends. So you might have a whole grade that gets pregnant at the same time. It's crazy. But anticipate that. Yeah, Kim.
I was visiting a teacher today, and she actually has a high school student who will be coming into her classroom Monday through Thursday from 9 until 1. She's got just one class left to take at the high school, and she wants to be a teacher. And so the high school principal reached out to the elementary school. And I know that teacher cadet programs are huge to take on and kind of facilitate and create. But I think that was really great that high school principal and that elementary principal and that community got together and and found a way for that high school student to get a great opportunity and, potential recruitment as well, because she's planning to go to school to be a teacher, and then that's more likely she'll come back to that community. And I thought that was a great connection to what you said about teacher cadet.
It
Yeah.
is. And Kim, thank you for bringing that up, because also what's new is high school schedules look totally different today than they did 10 years ago. Some of these high school kids go to school for 30 minutes and they're done. So this is a perfect opportunity to get more people in your buildings. Maybe if it's even not a part of that specific cadet program, but I'm amazed at how much different high school looks than it did 7-10 years ago for our students, which is good, more opportunities. But again, it's also an opportunity for us to get them into our buildings, especially at the elementary level and the middle level, and develop some mentorships and just possibly recruit, because 4 years down the road, they could come back.
Jackie and I have been having a side conversation in the chat. A lot of community colleges now have this 2-year free education kind of deal. The only issue is, like Jackie pointed out, in her district, you got to be 21 to sub, but you can teach if you're 20 if you've got a degree. And so I think some districts, now don't hold me to this, I've heard it rumored that some districts have lowered their age requirement on substitutes. And if that's the case, you've got some people who are getting some training and who are interested in doing it, and they're right there in your community. So that would be one of those areas, a community college, now that they are getting into that. Sarah says they have a 19-year-old that subs. Some districts have lowered that age requirement to 18. Some are still holding at 21. I suspect before long they'll all be at 18.
Yep.
I mean, I think about my first administrative job. This tells you how old I am. My first administrative job as a high school AP was running the bus lot, because we were switching from student drivers to adult drivers. And most of you didn't even know there's such a thing as existed. I was an AP then. And there was a time when we let 16-year-olds drive the school bus. So I think maybe an 18-year-old will be okay in the room.
Yeah.
It's not ideal, but that's not the way of the world anymore.
Nope. And Dr. Lim in Lincoln, they had just started the process. We had a teacher advocate for lower. They said 19, and it all started because there was a former student that she had, wants to be a teacher, didn't have Thursday and Friday classes, ideal candidate, but couldn't sub because she wasn't 21. So teacher goes to the board, advocates for it, and they're starting the process to revise that. Now there's going to be levels of, if you're 18, you have to have this, and this, but still. Where we are, we've got to do something different. So let's just switch gears to hiring at the school level, what that looks like for you at the school. And Dr. Lamb talked about this. You don't actually hire anybody, but you, or in my case, in a lot of districts throughout the state, hiring, the bulk of the process is done at the school level. So let's talk about those. And again, I can't say it's going to differ between every district. So this is just my experiences. But the first one there is know your district's hiring policies and procedures, right? Ensure, this is a big one. Ensure that the job posting reflects your ideal and desired candidate. So a lot of times what happens in districts is you contact HR, you say, I have a second grade opening, please post it. I want this, and this on the posting. HR post it, and it's not what it should be. So when they send that job posting back to you to review it, and make sure it says what you want, because again, this is the position this is your ideal candidate. So just keep that in mind. Assemble a team to review resumes. Now, again, this is when we had a lot of resumes. You might not have a lot of resumes these days, but if you do, assemble a team to have resumes. And here's why I said I focused on that, because I wanted to get people's input. But I also learned, as being an administrator, sometimes a lot of input is going to cause you a lot of frustration. So I tried to be strategic with where I wanted my input, because at the end of the day, I knew that I needed to make the decision that was best for the school, and my admin team did. So I got my teachers' buy-ins from reviewing the resumes. Like I included the grade level, like, hey, let's sit down, let's look at these resumes, let's pick top 5. And then once the top 5 are done, then we assembled an actual interview team. Who I had on my interview team, Dr. Lamb may have had somebody different, but I wanted that team small. 2 reasons why. Again, I valued input, but I didn't need 15 opinions. And also, I didn't want to intimidate people coming to interview in the building. So I always had my admin team. I had the grade level chair. I had the sit chair. And then I was very fortunate to have a really good PTO in both schools. And so I invited our PTO chair, who was a former teacher. That small team, we were able to make some really good decisions. But you go to a lot of principals invite, a lot of people to those interviews. And if that's what works for you and in your future position, that's great. I just wanted to keep my interview team smaller than bigger. What about you, Dr. Lamb? What did you do? Did you have bigger interview teams or small ones?
No, I'll tell you, and this is probably not best practice. I interviewed them alone myself to start with, and then I came up with the 3 or 4 or 5 that I wanted, and then I had a 4-person team after that. I wanted to make sure that they were a good cultural fit and it was somebody that I could work with. Now, after that, I always wanted a department chair. I wanted one parent and the school improvement team chair, and then me again, and that was it. But now that was only after I had interviewed the pool to start with. I weeded through all of them because I couldn't take the risk of them picking somebody that I couldn't live with. And so I would come up with the candidates that I could live with. And now after that, I'll acquiesce to what y'all want. But now I can't take people that I don't think is a good fit for our school or culturally. Yeah. And people said, well, Dale, you were trying to run them people off. I said, no, I wanted them to know what they were getting themselves into. There's no crying in baseball. There's no crying in school. I didn't want people that, I didn't know what I was getting myself into or any of those things. I wanted people that understood the deal. And then after that, we would have 3 people besides me, and that's what we would do. But no, that whole room full of people, that's just ridiculous. That's just crazy.
I've never seen it work.
In that case is you're not picking the best teacher. You're just finding the person with the best interview skills.
Yeah.
Which may or may not have anything to do with being able to teach.
Yeah. I did that one time. My first interview, I was a principal. I'd been principal 5 days. We had to do interviews. I had 10 people at the interview table. And then what happened is everybody got their feelings hurt because I didn't pick the candidate that they wanted. Everybody wanted a different one. And so then I ended up pissing 10 teachers off because I didn't go with what they wanted. So I learned real quick I needed to make that team real small.
Yeah, and again to kind of to put the finger on the scale, I made sure that they only saw people that I could live with. Yeah. That stops all of that hard feeling down the road as well. Is that you see somebody that you think's totally wrong, but that's the one they all love. Then what are you gonna do now, hero? Well, the trick is don't let them see the people that you don't want. And let them have some choice in who they get, but there's some people you just don't want in your building. And for some reason, I don't know what it is. Some people that's the person that they got to have. Don't ever think, well, I'll let that one slip through because nobody will pick him. That'll be the one they pick. Sure as I'm sitting here tonight, that'll be the one they pick. Then you're over the fence. And like you say, now everybody's mad.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the last one there, quickly interview at least 3 candidates. I would say that used to be easy to do, but in today's reality, that sometimes is not. But 3 is the pretty general interview number across the board. I had a couple of principals this past year that had called HR and said, we only have 1 candidate. It's been posted for 6 months. What are we going to do? So they HR advised them through that, and that's what I would say. But again, 3's kind of that healthy number to have. Again, this is another one that I use to value input, but also keep the input reined in, as we used a rubric during interviews when we were asking questions. That way, and even after the interviews, I limited the conversation of candidates with our interview team. And here's the reason why. I had the rubrics. The rubrics, they scored who they wanted as their candidates, and then we talked about what they said with my admin team, or I did it with the 3 of us. Again, I tried to limit the conversation. I valued the input, but I just tried to limit that conversation where we get into, well, I want her and Why do you want that? Just, sometimes it can get a little bit heated. I always, in Lincoln, we always said you're going to select the top two, and then, or three, and then you're going to call their references. So this is where it may be a little bit different in districts, because, when I was a principal, and then when in the district where I was a district administrator, principals had to call the references after they picked their top two. And typically you're going to ask the references these questions. You're going to talk about their strengths, relationships with students, their ability to collaborate. Would you rehire them? Again, and you would want to do that on your top two. With your top two candidates, don't put all your eggs in one basket with just one candidate, because what's going to happen if you get those references and they say nothing good about the candidate? Because what I did learn also as a principal is that people are really good at interviewing. A lot of people are really good at interviewing, but sometimes it doesn't transfer with their references. All right, and Dr. Lamb referenced this at the beginning of class. You pick the candidate that you are going to recommend for hire, okay? The biggest mistake that I have seen principals make is they call the candidate and say, we want to hire you, but the board's got to approve you, but it's yours, okay? What Dr. Lamb said about it's really hard for people to pass background checks, that is so true. And I've had several principals that have had to call and say, actually, we're not going to hire you because you didn't pass your background check. And then you get into a pretty big mess. So remember, you recommend for hire. The school board is the one that actually approves, has the hire. So my processes, the ones that I've dealt with, is that once we selected those candidates, checked their references, recommended them for hire, we sent the info to HR, and then HR begins the official hiring process. If you guys have dealt with HR, it is a lengthy process. It's going to eventually end up with requiring board approval. So I've had a lot of people ask me lately, well, is there any wiggle room with that? And my answer to that, in times of urgency, a school board can call a special meeting to approve a list of hiring, or a list of candidates to be hired. We had to do that several times in Lincoln County in the past 2 years, where we just had multiple vacancies, and there wasn't a board meeting anytime soon. Principals needed them in the building because they couldn't find subs, so our board had special called meetings. You can also, if your district allows it, kind of go around the back end of that, and if the candidate is already a sub or qualifies as a sub, then they can sub in that room until they're officially approved. Now, they'll still get sub pay, but still, it kind of expedites them actually being in that room that you want them. And that goes back to developing rapport and relationships with subs in your building, especially those who may be certified, because that could help you when you get into a bind. Now, anything you want to add there, Dr. Lamb?
Yes, we talked about this last night. That's becoming more and more and more commonplace to get people in as subs. Do not promise them that when they get hired that they'll get back pay. That will not happen. And there is an and you need to be clear. And even if they don't ask you, you need to say you'll get sub pay, period. There will not be any we'll talk to them or we'll look at it or any of that. So if they come to work a week before their hire date and they work that week, they'll only get sub pay. And when they get hired, they will not get paid retroactive back to their sub, or they won't get a second check. That they work for sub pay. Now, some people are offended when you tell them that, but you better tell them that up front, because their assumption is oh, they'll make it right. They'll go back and pay me. No, they won't. That will not happen.
So I'll add to that, Dr. Lamb, if you do hire a sub to take over and they're going to sub for 2 weeks, they're not responsible technically for the lesson plans, for the duty that still should be treated as there's a sub in that classroom. And here's why: they're not getting paid as a teacher. So that's another big misconception that, oh, we're going to be a sub in here for 3 weeks, just go ahead and start teaching. Well, that's not the case. They're a sub. So just keep that in mind. All right. So, and again, I put the statute here because we're going to talk a little bit about the district level, and it's right there. It shall be the duty of the superintendent to recommend and the Board of Education to elect all principals, teachers, and other school personnel in the administrative unit. So again, principals do not do this. At the end of the day, the Board of Education does this. So once the school level stuff is all finished up and you've submitted your information to HR. Typically, again, it varies by district, but then that's when the criminal background check, the drug test, the completion of forms, the submission of requested documents, transcripts, all that stuff, salary information, that all gets processed, and then it goes to a board meeting where they're approved. So typically in my past experience, have not been involved in that process, thankfully. There are some districts where principals have to do some of this stuff in terms of getting those forms submitted in, but I was always in a district where that was taken care of for me. So I guess I was lucky on that end as well. All right. So this is what I call this the meat and potatoes of tonight's presentation, because the hiring, you get good candidates, you got good people who are going to take your place. The third part is development and support. And a lot of times administrators, especially new administrators, skip this part. And so once hired, we've got to develop and support our teachers. And this has become even more critical in a post-COVID school setting because our candidate pool has shrank drastically, right? So the first thing that you want to do is you want to help your new teachers, even if they're new in general, just to your school. If they've got experience, you still want to develop them and support them, but you want to help them navigate all the available services provided by the district: legal, financial, childcare, etc. I had a big problem after I had those 5 teachers that went out on maternity leave. I had a big problem with childcare, and all 5 of them threatened to say, "I think I'm just going to stay at home." And, I talked to all of them and I said, no, you can't stay at home, because they were all really good teachers. What is it going to take to get you here? And so they're like, well, we need childcare services, especially on like our work days or days when we go. So I worked with our PTO and we developed this whole thing where we had this kind of this kid camp on our work days so that they could bring their kids to school. And there was somewhere for them to go. Now, I'm not saying just create that, because that took a whole lot of district and board approval as well. But I'm saying that develop and support your teachers where they need them, because had I not done that, I would have had 5 teachers that stayed at home, and I would have had 5 big gaps to fill. The second one, it seems very simple, but sometimes what you're going to learn is when you get in the hustle and bustle of administration, you forget about this. This is the first thing you forget about, is the appreciation of your staff. And it has to be more than just that teacher appreciation week. It has to be continuous. Always acknowledge your staff, their contributions to students, their contributions to school. Give them food every chance you can give. Every chance you have food in your building. It's amazing. I like to eat, and we would eat all the time because it just helps morale. It does. You probably
Dr. Sain?
Yeah.
So one of my things that I've done this year at Red Bank was I was on the culture committee. They created that because of my internship. And so once a month we have a staff potluck with a theme, and they love it. The volunteers come and they get duty-free lunch. They absolutely love it. The PTO, they offer like a dessert from a local dessert shop along with the food that everyone's brought in, and they just look forward to it once a month. They think that the admin put it together, but it was really me, but I'll let them take the credit for it. But the teachers love it.
I'm glad you said it, because that one day a month changes your entire year, right? And Christina also added something here that is even more important, is that if you can do the food and the duty free, you're golden. I mean, if that combination right there is your ticket. I always could not do duty free, but boy, when I couldn't, they reminded me that they didn't have duty free lunch. So, but yeah, if you can find ways to do that, do it. And that's also another duty free lunch. Community volunteers, parent volunteers, all those people that you need in your building. That's a great place for them to start. And again, if you do this, and let's say you have good substitutes and they're not in the building that day, don't forget to invite them. again, make them a part of your building any chance you get. Oh, another thing that when you appreciation that staff's really going to do is if they have angry or disrespectful parents, is that you're there to support them. And what I'm saying there is that you don't have to be in every conference or every meeting, but if you know that they have angry parents or disrespectful parents or difficult parents, check in on them. Ask them, give them advice if they're going into a meeting. Now, if you need, I tried to attend those meetings with angry parents, like teacher conferences, as much as I could. But again, that goes a long way, is when a teacher knows that they are supported and you have their back when they're having to deal with parents. Because I don't think there's probably anybody on this call who likes to talk to angry people, who likes to be involved with disrespectful people. It's unfortunate because we have to sit there a lot of times and just bite our lip, right? Because we can't say anything because we are the professionals. But if you have a principal there, an administrator there, that goes a long way. Continuing this trend, gosh, time flies when you're having fun, right? Provide curriculum support, focus on areas of teacher strength. Guys, this is what, in a world post-COVID, in a school world post-COVID, we could spend a lot of time talking about what teachers can't do, especially the ones we're hiring. So let's focus on what they can do. Change your mindset, because that's going to help you as an administrator. It's going to help your teachers. In your budgets, I'm going to start tying in a little bit about budgets. Budget for subs. I used to budget a ton of money for substitutes. Now, I know that there's then the argument, well, we can't find substitutes. But again, develop rapport with people and get them in there. But so that you can focus on PD, that you can give PD to teachers, but also provide PD on strengths so that those teachers can maybe be one day leaders in that area. So if you have a really good teacher, or you have a teacher who might not be good, but she's really good at teaching math, or he's really good at teaching math, develop that math strength so that they can be a teacher leader, and then it'll kind of help them on the backside. Protect planning as much as possible. Can't say that enough, because already their planning is getting taken away for teacher coverage. I think a lot of districts are moving toward this. Dr. Lamb, you might be able to speak to this and all throughout the state, but specifically in Lincoln, we started developing a stipend for teachers if they were having to cover planning periods to try and help. That started with a couple of schools actually taking their school funds to do it. And then our district said, no, we can't, we need to make this a district thing. So, when you get those school funds where there's a little bit of flexibility in what you can do, be creative in how you can support your teachers. And again, all of that for me went to really substitute so that we could get teachers out in the buildings or get them to PD, but during school hours, so they weren't having to do it after school. Another thing is provide PD during your staff meetings. Most things that you're going to present at staff meetings when you become an administrator could be in an email. And one of the tricks that I started using was I used Google Docs, and there's a feature on Google Docs that you can see who's viewed it. So what I would do is I would send out our weekly staff notes, and I would click on that viewing link, and I would go through there, and I would see who didn't read it, and I would shoot a friendly reminder. Hey, I saw you haven't been in the Google Doc with the staff notes. Make sure you check that out. Again, there's ways that we can get the message out and support teachers during that staff meeting, which are already staying after school for. Here's the big one, which is a huge mindset, would be for me, is do all things, even though newer teachers will only stay in the field 3 to 5 years. Do all these things. So even though that your investment might only be a 3 to 5 year investment, you still got to do it. Otherwise, it's going to be a 1 to 2 year investment. All right. And then hopefully if you do all these things, maybe we can change that trend. I mean, Dr. Lamb, when you started working, how teachers stayed in the field to retire, right? Every one of them. Every single one of them.
Yep. And I inherited 2 teachers when I became an elementary principal. One had taught 47 years and the other 41 or 2 years. That was not abnormal. Everybody stayed. Now nobody stays. About 80% of teachers turnover in the first 5 years. Now, we talked about this last night as well, and this has been one of the things, if we were in class, I would draw a graph across the board right now. the the first 5 years, new teachers really aren't cost effective in terms if we looked at their quality versus what we're paying them. But we got to get through that period to get them to that 5 year. Now, from 5 to 25 years is what we call the wagon pullers. That's the people that make your building, that make your school. But the trick is you can't get them there unless you get them in that through that first 5. That's the trick. Oh, I wish I had me a bunch of 10-year veterans. Well, then you won't if you eat your young every year. If all your beginners don't come back or they leave in the first 3 years, if you eat your young, you're not ever going to have those wagon pullers. And that really affects the culture and the outcomes in your building. So you got to take care of those 3 to 5, those babies, as we always, I know that's pejorative, but you got to take care of your babies. Yep. If you don't, they'll never grow up to be the adults you need them to be. And I know that's, I actually did my dissertation 1,000 years ago in that area about that, what we can do to keep those. And that was, you realize that was over 30 years ago, but understanding my history was, I never worked any place where people wanted, well, a couple, but my real history, I never worked anywhere that people wanted to be. I lived in the post-COVID world 30 years ago, where we were scrambling to find teachers, couldn't get them. They wanted to, couldn't get subs, all these things. I did food and swag, shirts, coats, jackets, sweaters before anybody else. I was an early adopter on that because I had to be. Now everybody has to be, and look at me. Now I look smart for the first time in 35 years because this is what I had to do. But I said back then, there'll be a time when everybody will have to do this. And everybody said, oh, you don't know anything there. Well, that's beside the point. But unfortunately, I have become prescient on this issue. I did my dissertation in this issue where how do we keep these beginning teachers? And I did it on principal leadership style, a way to change how we treated young teachers so that we could keep them. Because that was an issue at low wealth schools in large urban districts. That was a real issue. I was in Charlotte at the time. And what I experienced every day is the norm now. And it was not the norm then. But if you knew anything about where we were headed, you knew it was going to be the norm. It took 35 years, but I ended up being right.
Again, you guys know all of these things on this slide. I just want to pay close attention to number 8. Listen. Development support is probably 90% of you just listening to teachers. When teachers have your time, don't text, don't email, don't seem distracted. You got to be invested in them, because if they don't feel you're invested in them, they're not going to invest in you or the school. And the younger the generation, the more this matters. Even though they may be texting while they're talking to you, as soon as you pick up their phone or do something, they're going to go back and say, my principal doesn't want me here, I'm not valued. And then they're going to leave. And they can, because there's a lot of opportunities out there for teachers today, where they can make a lot more money and do a lot less work. So that one is key. Number one reason, there's just some research done by the American Institutes of Research. The number one reason people stay in school is because they're principal. The number one reason people stay in school is because they have a good, caring, strong principal. Okay. So yeah, food matters, swag matters, but knowing that they have a principal that cares about them, supports them, develops them, that makes a teacher stay. So just you got a lot of power when you go into this role, a lot of influence. All right. So view your develop and support through the lens of the North Carolina Teacher Working Conditions Survey. Make sure that you're constantly making sure teachers have time, facilities and resources, community support, student conduct is being addressed, teacher leadership, PD, instructional practices. I had a lot of principals who would get worried about this Teacher Working Conditions Survey, and I would say, why? Your school improvement plan should address these things. Your day-to-day operations should address these things. This should be a reflection of your good work. If you're worried about it, means you're probably not doing something about some of these areas. You're not supporting them. So, run that through that, because it gets you good results on your result or your surveys, but also it keeps your teachers in your building. Okay. So That's just a little tip that I always use that helped me with that.
Great tip.
All right. I don't want to bore you all to death, but you all are victims of the North Carolina Educator Evaluation System, NESAS.
And South Carolina is the same, by the way, for those of you who are going to ask.
It is a burden. It's a beast. As an administrator, you all know why, because most of you have sat in on the teacher side. It's extensive. Sometimes you don't understand why, if it's working or what's the purpose of it. But the number one thing there is NESAS is only as good as the energy that you as an administrator put behind it. All right, I had principals who didn't care about the NESAS. They just got it. It was a checklist, and come to find, guess what? When they wanted to get rid of a teacher, that became a problem. Or when they needed to release a teacher, that became a problem because they didn't put any energy behind that NESAS. It can be a burden, or it can be a tool for your school improvement. Okay, again, it's whatever lens you want to take. It's whatever approach you want to take. I would tell you to make it a tool for school improvement. I would tell you to put a lot of energy behind it because it's going to help you in the long run. So quickly, the evaluation process, every teacher has to be trained. They have to do a self-assessment, a professional development plan. There are 3 levels of a professional development plan: individual, monitored, or directed. The monitored or directed are your teachers who are underperforming, or it might be marked developing. So again, keep that in mind. The observation piece, there's a pre-conference. Typically, there's 3 types of observations. There's comprehensive, so that's less than 3 years; abbreviated, more than 3 years; standard, if your license renewal. Again, I am summarizing this, generalizing it, so there's a link up there that can tell you the specifics. And then there's a post-conference. So this is something that you, as a leader, you're going to want to get an idea of what approach your district takes with NESAS. So for example, I'm not calling any district out, but when I was a principal in Kannapolis City Schools, you weren't distinguished, and if you read what a distinguished candidate is, it is very, very difficult to be distinguished. Okay, and that's how it was designed. Now, that doesn't mean we didn't give distinguished in areas where teachers actually deserved it, but you got to be careful that you don't rate teachers based off of how long they've been in buildings. That was the thing. Just because they've been there for 20 years doesn't make them distinguished. There's no time frames on each of those components. But I will tell you, when I went to Lincoln County, there was a very different approach. There was a whole lot of distinguished. And then their HR department said, they kind of interpreted it, well, if this, then we're going to give them distinguished, yada, yada, yada. But I'm going to tell you something, and I'm calling out Lincoln County here. So again, the cone of safety. We had more problems with teachers who we didn't want to renew because guess what? We handed out that distinguished card like it was a free piece of pizza at Pizza Hut, if you read a certain book, right? But in Kannapolis, if we needed to non-renew, we had the documentation to do it because it was truly reflective of the teacher's performance. I hope I didn't confuse y'all by saying that, but don't what's the word I'm trying to look for? Don't inflate teacher evaluations because it could come back and haunt you in the end, especially if you're trying to non-renew. Dr. Lamb, you want to say anything about that?
That's exactly right. You got to be honest. Now that gate swings both ways, and my quick story on that is when we went from the 4-point scale to the 6-point scale, or the 6 to the 4 in North Carolina, when we started doing the teacher evaluation system, and I'll try to remember the official name of it. When we went from the 6 to the 4, like we use now, and we used the 4-point scale, regardless of the terminology in North and South Carolina. In the transition, we were in a district where they had that score inflation, and it didn't translate well in a 4-point scale, and everybody was great. It was Lake Wobegon. Everybody was good looking and better than that, better than average. That's the problem that you get into. If you inflate your scores, you can never get rid of anybody, or you can't get them to improve either. And that's more important to me, that you can't ever get them to improve. If it says they're distinguished, if they're a 4 already, and you're trying to do PD to get them to do better, well, it falls on deaf ears. I mean, we all got to get better all the time, and that kids deserve that. Yep. And if you have score inflation, you will never get improvement out of your teachers. Not only can you not get rid of the bad ones, you can't improve the average one either. Kids deserve great teachers, not average. And average becomes great, and it's a lowering of expectations. And so that's my problem with grade inflation.
Yep. All right, quickly, who are you going to evaluate? And the reason I put this on here is because it's going to be a little bit different, and you want to make sure that you're doing the for example, obviously the teachers in your building, you'll evaluate your instructional coaches, the media coordinators, but when you get into shared positions, just make sure that you know what your district's plan is. So for example, when I was a principal, we had an AIG teacher who rotated all the schools, but I was the one that was responsible for the evaluations. And there, in other districts, they might have said, okay, Principal A, you get observation 1, Principal B 2. So just make sure you know who you're observing, because the worst thing for you as an administrator is when you get to May, you realize that you were supposed to be observing someone the whole year and you've done 0. Okay, so just make sure you know who you're supposed to observe, especially with those transient positions that you have within the district. What are you evaluating? Again, leadership, respectful environments, content knowledge, facilitation of learning, reflection of practice. And also the one that is nobody likes to talk about, the bane of a lot of people's existence, is standard 6, which is, that EVOS model, teacher growth.
That's SLO for you South Carolina people. That's your student learning objectives in South Carolina. It's EVOS in North Carolina.
EVOS season is a hard season. I could sit here and talk about
and that's what I was referring to when you need teachers to get better. Their evaluations are great, but then their kids' scores aren't. That's when the problem comes. When the kids' performance scores, that growth score on the state report card, when you pop up the state report card, it's got your performance, and it's got your growth.
Yeah.
The problem is when you've been giving all your teachers 4s on their formal observation, but their growth scores are in the tank. How are you going to improve them then? They're not growing kids. They're not being effective teachers. What are you going to do now? They're just effective manipulators of the evaluation system. TPAI was the first evaluation system in North and South Carolina was called Teacher Performance Appraisal Instrument. And now it became McReal, and now it's NESIS, and I forget what it's called in South Carolina. Y'all have to help me on that one. Christina knows what it is. The handbooks, by the way, are under this week's learning section, Zoom session in Blackboard, that has the handbooks for teacher evaluation. It also has EVOS Standard 6, what that says. Again, South Carolina does the same thing. They just call it a couple different things, but it's the same thing. And there's where the grade inflation gets you. Is you give teachers 4s, their evaluations look good, their performance data, their growth data on their kids is not good. And now you're hung. You've got no wiggle room now. You're fried as a principal.
And I will tell you guys, traveling across this country over the past couple of months, our EVOS system, I know it has its flaws, but we are by far in a lot better shape than a lot of other states who have other types of value-added systems. So I know it's sometimes we get frustrated with EVOS, but we are in a much better place than a lot of other states. Again, evaluations for classified or non-certified. Again, this really does vary by district, and so again, but who does that typically include? Again, teacher assistants, bus drivers, front office, data managers, custodians. Again, just make sure you know your policy on that, because it is different district to district. Dr. Lamb, you want me to keep going, or you want to?
Yeah, go.
Okay. All right. I'll go through. This is the good stuff. What happens when a teacher leaves, resigns, not rehired? I've linked there's a piece of legislation, or General Statute 115C 325 Part 3, Principal and Teacher Employment Contracts. You want to know that. You want to read it. So I'm just going to summarize it here quickly. When a teacher plans to not return, they must give at least a 30-day notice. Now, there are some districts, Dr. Lamb, you might know a little bit more about this, but actually have extended that.
45 if they claim it's an essential employee.
There you go. But this includes if they do not return during the summer. There's a lot of people out there who think, oh, I'm going to resign on July 1st, and I don't have to give a 30-day notice. That is not the case. So again, just know you can hold them.
The first 30 days of the next school year. That is correct.
Um, each district may have specific processes and procedures for resignations. So make sure you know what that looks like in your district, and this also includes retirements. There's a specific process for retirements. Some districts require, or they strongly suggest, an exit interview when any of those things happen. I always enjoyed reading exit interviews. Our district made those available. They did them at the district level, but because here's the thing, if it is available, read the information, because if one teacher feels a certain way, let's just say a teacher leaves and they're unhappy, then there's probably several other teachers in your building that feel that way. And so that's an opportunity for you to be proactive and address some of those issues that were listed in the exit interview so that you can kind of stop a mass exodus. So again, just keep that in mind. The exit interview information it's hard to read sometimes. Sometimes it's not true, but then in a reality, there's a lot of things that are true. Just like Kristen was talking about pregnancies. People get pregnant together. I probably should reword the way I say that. People get pregnant at the same time, but also people leave at the same time. We do a lot of things in education in groups. So again, just be mindful of those trends. And then each district has their own specific procedures and protocols regarding transfers. Here's the thing I want to tell you. Well, and most, a lot of districts set a July 1st deadline. A lot of systems do that a lot earlier, especially between school years. There were a couple of years where we had in Kannapolis, we moved principals around. A lot of teachers said, oh, we want to go with this principal. So they made the deadline a lot earlier. So they moved it sometimes. So you can just know what that deadline is. And here's a big tip that I have for you. If you're recruiting a teacher from another school, let's say you become an assistant principal. You say, hey, there's this teacher at my former school that I want here. And you talk to your principal and y'all agree to reach out to that teacher. Let your administrator or your fellow colleagues know. Talk about it. Don't blindside them, cite them. You don't want to be blindsided. It doesn't do well for collaboration within your district. Just be open and honest and talk about those things with your colleagues. That would be my tip. Now, my experience is in medium-sized and smaller districts. In CMS, that might not be the case. In the big districts, that might not be the case. It might be impossible to do. I just always would reach out and say, hey, you got a teacher. I know someone here we want them or that wants them. I'm going to interview them. Just want to give you the heads up. It goes a long way. All right, dismissals or non-renewals. Quickly, insubordination, inadequate performance, neglect of duty, failure to comply with board policy. Again, going back to observations, you would not believe how many principals would come to me and say, I need to non-renew this teacher. I would go straight to NESIS, and their first observation, they were accomplished or distinguished in every category. And then my answer was, why? Where's your documentation? Document everything. And I put that down there. That goes back to take NESIS seriously, make every effort to support and develop the teacher. You need to show that you are trying to improve this teacher. And then always, like I started it with, I'm going to end it with, consult with HR. They're going to give you the best advice and help you throughout this entire process, especially if you're new. So again, just take those seriously. And again, that's a year-long process. Non-renewals and dismissals don't happen in May. And a lot of people think that's when we can do it. It starts in August and it ends in June. So just keep that in mind.
What if you sign a 4-year contract with your school, with the district? What happens then? Because that's what I did. They sent me a contract, the Board of Education. They do it every year. Mm-hmm. But this year, I got one for 4 years. I've never gotten one for 4 years. But mine was for 4 years, and I signed it. Because I was ready to go back to work. But what do you do in that instance?
If there is reason for dismissal and you document it, you can make your case.
North and South Carolina are right to work states. The contract is superseded by what's called just cause. If they have cause, they can still let you go. You can't be. What was it I saw today? There was a teacher smoking dope and drinking wine in the classroom up at Third Creek in Ireland, right across from the golf course. right above the house there. You don't keep people like that. I don't care what kind of contract they've got. Actually, I think that they first reported it was a teacher. I think they later reported that it was a substitute teacher. But no, if you violate any of the terms of employment, they're still going to let you go, whether you got a contract or not. You got to understand that there are reasons to let you go. I want to hit Dr. Sain, excellent job. Thank you. I want to hit a couple of points right quick before we're going to let Christina tell us about her exit interview today. On that evaluation system, when there's different ones, there's abbreviated, there's comprehensive. If you have a teacher who you've put on an action plan, it doesn't matter what year they are, you go back to the full. Got it? Understand that. If you're in a low performing school, everybody is comprehensive. There is no expedited in a low performing school. That designation, that means everybody gets the full. Nobody gets the abbreviated or the partial. You got to do everybody completely full if it's a low performing school. If you've got a teacher that's low performing and you're moving to an action plan, or you're doing that support, that intervention support in the first 2 quarters of the year, that you need to put them on the full plan as well. Don't just do the abbreviating at the end of the year. You got no data and then try to dismiss them, as Dr. Sain said. Oh, well, they were in their 5th year, so I didn't have to do all those. But if you knew they were struggling, you should have put them on the full. I wouldn't even consider moving somebody's on unless they had been on the full all year. Make sure that you're doing those evaluations. Make sure that you're getting that. And here's my pet peeve, and I'll end the night on this one. Do not use the sandwich method of feedback. Just don't. It's bad technique. For those of you who don't know what the sandwich method is people who are scared to have critical conversations. What you do is you say 3 or 4 good things about somebody, and then quickly like this, you say something bad, and then you say 3 or 4 more good things. What do you think they take away from that sandwich method? They heard the good stuff, when what you really needed them to hear was that thing that they've really got to improve on. If you got to tell somebody that they've got to improve on something, that's what they need to hear. I mean, you're not beating them up, but too many times folks only hear what they want to hear. They only want to hear the good stuff. You can have a session with them where you tell them the good stuff, but do not. Some people, the sandwich method is you should never give people bad news without giving them good news first and then good news again. No. Woman up, man up, and do your job. You got to have critical conversations. People aren't ever going to get any better if you don't have expectations and then help them get better. And so I am not, as you can tell, a fan of the sandwich method of giving feedback. I'm in favor of critical conversations. I'll just tell you that. Now I want to hear from Christina. She had an exit interview today from a good school district. She's not running away. She's running too, and that's great. But tell us what Lexington did.
Well, they sent me a package via email letting me know what my benefits options were. And so they encouraged me to just fill it out online and not come into the district office. So I went. I just wanted to see what to say. Like, what are you going to do? So she went over all of my benefits and what I could do and what I shouldn't do. And then towards the end, she said, so why are you leaving the district? And I thought to myself, do I give her my honest answer or do I just hold back? I gave my honest answer. I told her that the district has created a cohort of teachers that they are handpicking for future assistant principal jobs, and it makes it almost impossible for good aspiring assistant principals to get a job because you make them jump through hoops and then they still don't get an interview with any of the schools, and they might have been a good assistant principal, but they'll never get a chance. And so she reared back in her chair and she said, oh.
I'm not laughing at.
That's that stuff you got to hear though. You don't want to in those exit interviews. That's what Dr. Sain was talking about. But there's a lot of truth in that stuff.
And I've recruited a lot of their teachers from Lexington One. And so she indirectly wanted to ask about our benefits package and our pay scale. I didn't tell her any of that information. And she tried to ask me what my salary was going to be at the new charter school. And I didn't tell her. And she just looked at me like, oh, you're really going to do this? Yes, I am really going to do this. Where's the form? And I'll sign it for you. And so she sent me an email, I think an hour later. She was like, thank you for your service with Lexington School District 1. Okay. It was done. And I think they must have told my principal what I said. And she kind of looked at me funny this afternoon. She said, how was your interview? I said, it went great. And I gave them an extra week. I could have left over spring break, but I gave them an extra week.
Well, you know, one of the things that we talk about in organizational leadership is if you don't want to know, don't ask.
Don't ask. I was very honest, and I did talk about my principal a little bit.
If you want to know, then you will ask because that'll help you improve. You can't improve if you don't collect any data. But to Dr. Sain's point that he opened up with tonight on recruitment, public schools, you've got to be able to recruit to your school because other people will. They'll recruit to theirs. Not just charters and privates or parochial schools, Catholic schools, but other public schools will recruit as well. I can tell you I did. I did everything I could do. I mean, I'd have fought a bear if that's what it took. When you got vacancies and you don't have anybody, you'll do what it takes. You'll find a way. And that's what I mean. You know, if this is a rough and tumble business, it's not for the faint-hearted. If you're squeamish over the sight of blood, it's not for you. You know, or if you can't, you know, just like if you're in elementary school and you can't stand vomit, this ain't the place for you. You know, they use a different product. That old stuff that used to come in that yellow can, that smell worse than the vomit. But you got to get in there with it, folks. You got to get in there with it.
What are you recommending? And congratulations again, Christina, because I hear you loud and clear, and I really, really wish you the best. What are you recommending for, because one of my colleagues, there are 4 of us in the intern pool at my school, and one won't be finished until next year. And they're already, it's UNC Charlotte program, they're already placing them in AP spots. I know that this particular program is different from that. So what are you recommending for us in terms of, should we go ahead and throw our hat in the ring and apply at places?
Yes.
Because they're having a district fair coming up April 22nd.
There you go. Now,
Saturday.
what they're doing with those from UNC Charlotte, they're placing them in a 10-month internship, paid internship, but that's because they got that scholarship. But now, you know, we don't. I got an email today. I got to fill it out tonight. About how many students that we're going to have that want that, you know, that are going to apply for that 10-month scholarship deal. We have none. You got to give up your job there, and there's some other drawbacks to that as well. And so we don't require, or we don't participate in that. The problem with that internship, if you don't get a job, you've lost your teaching job. And there's some other issues that go along with that as well, but that's what the placements are being done. But yes, apply for jobs. Now's the time.
Would the transfer fare through our district be also part of that process, or no?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it wouldn't be a transfer. It would be going from one position to another. Does that make sense?
It'd still be they'll still count that as a transfer.
Okay.
I told you how smart I am. Look at that. I started that in 1987. I finished it in 1993, my doctorate at Chapel Hill. The relationship between inexperienced teacher job satisfaction and perception of principal's leadership style. We knew, or I did 33 years ago when I started that dissertation, that we're going to have problems getting teachers in our business. The chickens have come home to roost.
Dr. Lamb, I gotta go catch a flight.
I gotta go myself. We all got to go. We're past our time. Thank you for staying with us.
Safe travels, Dr. Sain. Safe travels.
Thank you. I'll see you.
Right. All right. We'll see you all next week. Everybody have a good week. Love you. Mean it.